Thank you, everybody. I hope I am audible. Anaga,
Yes,
madam.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
very
Yes,
good.
sir.
So, thanks a lot for this invitation. It would have been, of course, better to meet in person, but I don't know if I would have had so many people attending my talk had it been a real talk. So, this is a pleasure anyway. I hope you are all safe and well and are following the instructions to the T. I wish that you keep well. I will start presenting now.
Yes, sir.
Okay, do let me know if you have any problem in seeing it. I
Yes, sir. We can see.
Okay, good. So the title of my talk is Continued Fractions, providing best rational approximations since antiquity. Are we all okay? Is there any comment? No. Okay. Um, so there are a few things which I am going to assume in this talk. I will assume that everybody knows what is a rational number and how people work with rationals. Rational is a fraction of the form a by b, where a and b are integers, b is taken to be non-zero, a can be any integer. Normally, we take the denominator to be a natural number. So if the rational a by b is negative, then we put the negative sign for the numerator. It is also very natural to take a and b to be in the smallest form. So for instance, if you have the number 5 upon 10, then it is natural to think of it as 1 by 2. So we will also, wherever possible, assume that the denominator and numerator are co-prime. That is what we assume. So these rational numbers, because they are built up from integers, are supposed to be slightly easier to study than the real numbers. Real numbers is again something that I am going to assume that everybody knows. This is basically the real line. So if you consider the real line and fix a point, call that point 0, then fix any other point by choosing a direction. You can call that point to be 1. And then once you have fixed 0 and 1, you have the positive side, negative side. Then any point that you can plot on this line could be called a real number. So a real number is what we all know as real numbers. So let's not worry too much about the definitions. We are not, going to use the definitions too much. But people did worry about the definitions and constructions, and people worried about how to construct real numbers from rationals. And there are several ways to do that. But one of them is what is called the closure of rationals. So this is a statement which I am not going to prove, although I will perhaps mention some ways to see that. If you have a real number theta, then there are always rational numbers which are very close to theta. So given any real number theta, we can always find a sequence of rationals which converges to that theta. And there are several ways to obtain this sequence. I think analysts would prefer to take some interval around theta of length 1 by of radius 1 by n, so the length will be less than or equal to 2n. And then rationals are dense in the real set, so that means any interval, any open interval contains a rational. So once you have this interval of length 2 by n, say theta minus 1 upon n comma theta plus 1 upon n, open on both sides, then there is a rational number in that. Call that Pn upon Qn and let n go to infinity. So the length of these intervals go to 0, and so you get a sequence converging to theta. This is one way by which analysts would perhaps get the sequence, but I think people in arithmetic would like to do it in a different way. So let me go towards that, and hopefully I will be able to motivate you towards continued fractions from that. So let me set up these notations. by this notation, the square bracket around theta, we mean the integral part of theta. So whenever we have any real number theta, we will always have some integer before that and some integer after that. This property of real numbers is called the Archimedean property. So you have some integer, call it n. Then there is this n which is less than or equal to theta. But n plus 1 is strictly bigger than theta. There is always a unique integer n with this property. We call that n to be the integral part of theta. This is called the floor function. Or this is also the largest integer which is less than or equal to theta. Okay, so I hope this notation is clear to everyone that whenever you take any real theta, then the square bracket theta is the integral part of theta. And of course, so this is a crude approximation to theta. For instance, if your theta is 12.345, then the integral part will be 12. So this is an integer which is close to your theta, and therefore you also get a rational number which is now at a distance less than theta. But we do not want to lose the information about theta. So the remaining part is something that we still want to keep in our hand. So we call that the fractional part of theta. So if your theta is 12.345, then the integral part will be 12 and fractional part will be 0.345. This is how we are cutting the real number. So we are cutting the real number by taking the integer, largest integer which is just before that, and then taking the difference from the largest integer. So one thing to note is that the fractional part is always going to be between 0 and 1, but it will never be equal to 1. If the fractional part is equal to 1, that would mean that you have not taken the integral part correctly. So these are some basic properties, that your integral part is always an integer. It is with an integer satisfying this property, and the fractional part is then something which is in 0, 1, but it's never equal to 1. In the next slide, we will see some examples. So any concept is understood better when we look at some examples. So here are some examples. If I take my first number to be 2.71828, its integral part is 2, because 3 is bigger than this number, 2 is smaller than this number, therefore 2 is the largest integer smaller than or equal to this number. So the integral part is 2 and the fractional part is then 0.71828. Okay, so this example is quite straightforward. Pi, if you know this example, if you have seen this before, this is an approximation to the Euler number E. And another such popular number is the number pi. So you would have known that pi is 3.14 ... and therefore the integral part of pi, which is not very difficult to compute even by geometry constructions, is equal to 3. The integral part of pi is 3, and then the fractional part is going to be pi minus 3. I do not want to write the decimal expansion here, so I will simply write it as pi minus 3. So we observe from both these examples that if you take the integral part and the fractional part and take the sum, then you should get your number. So here we have it to be 2 and 0.71828. The sum of these two is your number theta, 2.71828. Similarly, for pi, if you take 3, which is the integral part, and pi minus 3, which is the fractional part, the sum will give you pi, which it should. Note that if your theta is negative, then the integral part is going to be computed in this way. This will not be minus 1, because minus 1 is an integer which is bigger than minus 1.2. So the integral part of minus 1.2 is minus 2. Therefore, integral part can be a negative number. It can also be 0. If I had taken instead of minus 1 by 2, if I had taken it to be only 0.2, then the integral part would be 0. And here the fractional part is not 0.2, it is 0.8. We have seen that fractional part has to be a positive quantity. You are removing the integral part from theta, and integral part is less than theta. So your fractional part is going to be a positive number. Moreover, the sum of the fractional part, which is 0.8, and the sum of the integral part should be your number, minus 1.2. So that should tell you that the fractional part is then 0.8. And finally, trivial example, if your theta is an integer, then the integral part is going to give you the same integer, and then the fractional part is 0. So with the help of these things, we can now get a sequence with the following property, that if you have any real theta, then there is a sequence Pn upon n with theta minus Pn upon n less than 1 by n. How would one get this? So we do it for the first entry will be where you will need to take P1 upon 1. You need to get a P1 with theta minus P1 less than 1. And the construction of the above examples should tell you that you will take P1 to be the integral part of theta. So your first term in the sequence is the integral part of theta. P1 is the integral part of theta. You have theta minus integral part is less than 1. The P2 by 2 should have the property that theta minus P2 by 2 is less than 1 by 2. If you multiply by 2, you will get 2 theta minus P2 is less than 1. And so P2 has to be the integral part of 2 theta. Let's do it for one more integer. If we want to find P3, the property we are looking for is P3 theta minus P3 by 3 is less than 1 by 3. So that translates into 3 theta minus P3 mod is less than 1. And therefore, a natural choice for P3 is the integral part of 3 theta. Now you may want to know that, here we had taken, if pi was our real number, then we would have taken P1 to be 3. Some of you may want to know why do we not take it to be 4, because 4 is also an integer which is at distance less than 1 from pi. But the problem is that if your theta is already an integer and you take your first entry to be integral part plus 1, then the distance is 1. So then you don't get the distance to be less than 1. Therefore, it is always safe to take the largest integer which is less than or equal to your theta. Okay, so we now have obtained another way to think of this sequence is the following, that you would look at all the integers 1, 2, 3 and so on, and your theta is situated between there is a pair of consecutive integers such that theta is between those two. Then you take the one on the left hand side. Similarly, when your n is 2, you will have the all rational numbers where the denominator is 2 and you allow the GCD to be more than 1. So you will have 0, 1 by 2, 2 by 2, 3 by 2, 4 by 2 and so on. Once again, your theta will lie between two consecutive such rationals, and the distance between any two consecutive rationals where the denominator is n, that distance is equal to 1 upon n. So the distance between 11 by 8 and 12 by 8 is 1 by 8. Therefore, if you fix the denominator to be n, your theta has to be between two such consecutive a by n and a plus 1 by n, and therefore distance of theta from a by n has to be less than 1 by n. You will, if your theta happens to be equal to one of the a by n, you will take that a by n to be your term in the sequence. So we have now obtained a sequence Pn by n with this property. What is the big deal about this property? This is, we are getting the rational numbers with the property that now the closeness from theta is measured in terms of the denominator. So, this is because, so what we are asking for is that our rational number not just be close to the theta, but it is, how close should be dictated by the denominator. That means if I am taking the p by q with q being very high, then I would want my p by q to be very close to theta. That is one good thing about these rationals. So if I replace the Pn by n with Pn by Qn, we are getting a sequence Pn upon Qn converging to theta with the property that theta minus Pn upon Qn is less than 1 by Qn. So this is an approximation that we always get, and with rather easy arithmetical construction. So we have the integral part for any real number theta, and using that we have such a sequence. This is something which is a normal occurrence, ordinary occurrence, and now we are going to define a rational number giving a good approximation to a real number. So we say that P by Q is a good approximation to theta if this distance theta minus P by Q is less than or equal to 1 upon Q square. So having theta minus P by Q less than 1 by Q is a normal thing that can be done with some very basic constructions. But we are asking for a P by Q to be even closer to theta. And the closeness is measured by the denominator but with a higher order. So we are saying that P by Q is a good approximation to our theta if theta minus P by Q is less than or equal to 1 upon Q squared. This is something more than we are asking than what we are this is more that we are asking than what we have here. So we are asking for a good approximation. Of course, it is all right to make a definition, but one can ask whether there are such good approximations to a given real number theta. And perhaps it may come as a surprise to some of you that this does exist, and the proof is not very difficult. I will mention the proof briefly. This is a theorem by Dirichlet, and the theorem says that if you have a real number theta, then there is a rational P by Q with mod theta minus P by Q being less than 1 upon Q square. Remember, in the definition, we were happy with having the equality. We were okay with less than or equal to, but Dirichlet says that he will give you more. He says that you have a good approximation where you have a strict inequality. How do we see Dirichlet's theorem's proof? So I could not, of course, write the whole proof. I have written two sequences here, and let's see. So there is this first sequence that for any q bigger than 1, there are pq integers with q small q between 0 and capital Q, satisfying this inequality q theta minus p less than or equal to 1 by capital Q, and which is less than 1 by small q. If you assume this statement, then our theorem follows. That is because I have this q theta minus p strictly less than 1 upon q. I am looking at this part, and I divide throughout by q. Remember, your q is a positive integer. So you can divide by that and you will get theta minus p by q being less than 1 upon q square. So this follows from this simply by dividing by the integer q. So once I prove this statement, Dirichlet's theorem will follow. How do we have this statement? So if you take small q, if you prove that there is such numbers with small q less than capital Q, then this inequality follows. 1 upon capital Q is strictly less than 1 upon small q. So we need to prove only this. And this is done by using a principle called the pigeonhole principle. So the pigeonhole principle says that if you have n holes where pigeons are going to sit, and if there are more than n pigeons, then at least one hole should have two or more pigeons. So this is something which is quite obvious, one should say. If you have 10 boxes and if you have 12 balls to keep in these 10 boxes, then if you put one in each box, then you are only done with 10 balls and there will be two left. And so you will have to use at least one another box to have two or more balls. So we use the same principle here. And this statement says that we consider these numbers. So here this is the fractional part of theta, fractional part of 2 theta, dot, 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 fractional part of capital Q minus 1 into theta. So we have multiple of theta by 1, multiple of theta by 2, dot, 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 multiple of theta by Q minus 1. So we have Q minus 1 numbers here. These are Q minus 1. If I add 1, I get Q, and then with 0, we have Q plus 1 real numbers. And I already told you that the fractional part is always going to be between 0 and 1. And we have 0 and 1 here. So all these numbers lie in the interval 0 to 1. The closed interval 0, 1 contains these q plus 1 integers, q plus 1 real numbers. And then I am going to cut the interval 0, 1 into q subintervals of length 1 upon q. This is like, if I have my q to be 2, then I will take 0 to 1 by 2 and 1 by 2 to 1. I will get two parts of equal length. If my capital Q is 3, I will take 0 to 1/3, 1/3 to 2/3, and 2/3 to 3/3, which is 1. So we are going to get Q sub parts, but we have Q plus 1 elements which are going to lie in the union of these Q sub parts. So there have to be two of these numbers which are going to lie in one such subinterval. And once you have that two of these numbers are at a distance less than or equal to 1 upon q, you simplify that number. So you will have, if it is 2 theta and 1, then you will write it as 2 theta minus integral part of 2 theta minus 1. So you will have a multiple of theta minus an integer. If you take any two such fractional parts and you take either 1 or 0 with any one such fractional part, you will of course not get you are not going to get 0 and 1 both lying in one such subpart, because 0 and 1 lie at two ends. So when you get two of these numbers to lie in one such subinterval, at least one of them will have to be a fractional part, which you will write as k theta minus the integral part, and then you have this, or you will have k theta minus integral part minus L theta minus its integral part. And so you are going to get the k minus L is a non-zero number because k and L are distinct. So your q is non-zero. You can choose the order so that q becomes positive and you have the integer p. So once you have two of these lying in a unique such subinterval, it gives you Q and P with this property, and then you have the Dirichlet's theorem. So that is quite good. We earlier saw that every real number can be approximated by rationals in some way. Then we used our arithmetic constructions to show that in fact we have theta minus P by Q to be less than 1 upon Q. And now Dirichlet says that you can do even better. You can have a good approximation to theta. So you have theta minus P by Q to be strictly less than 1 upon Q square. So this Dirichlet's theorem has a nice application. Let me just mention this in passing, that if your theta is irrational, then we get infinitely many good approximations. And these good approximations will also converge to our theta. So what do I mean by this? If we look at theta minus P by Q, if theta is an irrational, irrational is that number which is not a rational number. So P by Q, these are all rational numbers, but you have more real numbers than rational numbers. For instance, square root of 2 is not a rational number. There is a nice proof using the fundamental theorem of arithmetic that square root of 2 is not a rational. For people who do not know this, you may just take it on faith that there are real numbers which are not rational numbers, and therefore theta minus P by Q will also not be a rational. Because if theta minus P by Q is a rational, say A by B, then theta will be A by B plus P by Q, which will give you some cross multiplication, will give you numerator, then you will have a denominator, and theta will turn out to be a rational after all. Therefore, sum of two rationals is a rational. That would tell you that if you take one irrational and subtract a rational from that, you are going to get an irrational number. So this number, theta minus P by Q, is never going to be equal to any rational. And if I have one good approximation, then we will have theta minus P by Q less than 1 upon Q square for that denominator. But this is also not 0, because theta minus P by theta is irrational. Theta minus P by Q cannot be rational. In particular, it can also not be 0. So you will choose a capital Q which is strictly less than, with the property that 1 upon capital Q square is strictly less than your theta minus P by Q. And then applying this property of Dirichlet's theorem, this statement of Dirichlet's theorem, you get an even better approximation. So starting with theta and one good approximation, you are going to get another good approximation closer to theta. And so from the second approximation, we will get another approximation closer to theta. So you can keep doing it for irrational numbers, and you will never stop, because these are all approximations. They will never be equal to your irrational number. So you have infinitely many rationals with the property that theta minus P by Q is less than 1 upon Q square, and these are distinct. You will also have that Pn by Qn converges to theta automatically from these being infinitely many rational numbers. That is the property for real numbers which are not rational. On the other hand, interestingly, if your theta is a rational number, say A by B, then A by B minus P by Q, this can be either 0 if your A by B happens to be P by Q, or it will have to be at least 1 upon BQ, because this is the thing here in the modulus is AQ minus BP upon BQ, and modulus of AQ minus BP, if it is not 0, has to be at least 1. If you have an integer which is either positive or negative, its modulus is at least 1. Therefore, the distance between any two such rationals is bigger than or equal to product of their the reciprocal of the product of their denominators if you are writing them in the lowest form. And so we have this bigger than or equal to BQ. If you want this quantity to be less than 1 upon Q square, so you will have a 1 upon Q square written here. So 1 upon Q square has to be bigger than 1 upon BQ, which means that Q has to be less than B. And so you have only finitely many fractions, giving you a good approximation to a rational number. If you are looking for applying Dirichlet's theorem to a rational number, you are going to get only finitely many P by Q. This is a very wonderful theorem because this can help in determining whether a given number is rational or irrational. So there are some numbers which we can construct using mathematical constructions, say zeta 3 or some other number, I don't know. And it's not clear whether the number is a rational number or irrational number. Decimal expansion doesn't help. And so this is a property that helps in distinguishing rationals and irrationals. So approximation is something which is very important, and the way arithmeticians do it has good applications that you can distinguish rational numbers and irrational numbers using this property. So let's see whether we can compute such good approximations for a number. Let's do an example. So we start with theta equal to 355 by 113. I am taking this particular rational number. I am going to approximate it in a good way by rational numbers. So if I want to take P by Q with 355 minus 1/3, 113, 355 upon 113 minus P by Q to be less than 1 upon Q square, I will start with my Q being 1. So I'm going to first take an integer which approximates my theta in a good way. And we have seen that first natural approximation to our theta is going to be the integral part of theta. So integral part of theta is our first natural approximation. So we set A0 to be the integral part of this number. 113 into 3 is 339, which is less than 355, and the next multiple of 113 is beyond 355. So the integral part of 355 upon 113 is 3, and then the fractional part is 16 upon 113. So we have written 355 upon 113 as an integer plus its fractional part. Now we are going to approximate it further. We are going to look for another approximation. So we should look for a P by Q in 0, 1, because now once we have approximated the integer, it remains to approximate this remaining part, 16 upon 113. And this is between 0 and 1. So we are looking for an rational number in 0, close 0, open 1 with this property that 16 upon 113 minus P by Q is strictly less than 1 upon Q square. This is what we want to do. The cross multiplication will tell you that the inequality translates to 16Q minus 113 is less than 113 by Q. We are going to solve for this inequality. We will start by fixing various values of the integer P and then solve the above inequality for looking while looking for Q to be strictly bigger than P. So I will just tell you to begin with, if you take P equal to 1, then this will give you 16Q minus 113 less than 113 upon Q. Now if you take P equal to 1, Q has to be 2 or more because we want 1 upon Q to be in 0, 1. You cannot take Q equal to 1. You will need to take Q to be bigger than 1. Therefore, 113 upon 2 is an upper bound for the 16Q minus 11 by 3. 113. So 113 upon 2, which is say roughly 57, we'll need to take multiples of 16, which are close to 113. Remember, P is 1. So we are taking multiples of 16 which are close to 113 at most by 57. So if you take 16 into 5, you will see that 16 into 5 is 80. And the distance of 80 and 113 is 53. So that is less than 57. But now your Q has gone to 5. So because Q is 5, we will demand that the distance between the multiple of 16 and 113 be less than 113 by 5, which is roughly 23. So 16 into 5 will not work now anymore because the distance 16 into 5, which is 80, minus 113 is 53, and therefore we are not going to get the distance to be less than 113 by 5, which is 23. So we go even further up, and this is the way we keep solving. So for P equal to 1, you will see that you get Q equal to 7. 7 will give you 16 into 7 is 112, and 113. Sorry, I think the distance was not 53, but it was 33. 16 into 5 was 33, but still it is not less than 23. So 16 into 7 is 112 minus 113, that is 1, which is less than 113 upon 7, which is also roughly 16. So the nice thing about Q equal to 7 is that this is the integral part of 113 by 16. What we have done was that we took integral part of our theta and wrote it as a fraction 16 upon 113. If you take the reciprocal of the fractional part, then our Q is actually the integral part of the reciprocal of the fractional part. I will come to this again, don't worry if you are not quite following this right away. So the first two terms of our sequence are 3 and 3 plus 1 by 7, which is 22 by 7. So some of you have now perhaps realized where we are leading to. Moreover, now you can change from P equal to 1 to P equal to 2, 3, 4. You will see that the Q that you get is nothing but 7 into P. So for 2, we are going to get 2 by 14, but 2 by 14 is simply 1 by 7. Or for 3, you are going to get 3 by 21, which is same as 1 by 7. So you don't get a different fraction for 2, 3, 4. And actually for P equal to 5, there is no solution to this inequality. This inequality has no solution. There is no Q which satisfies this inequality for P equal to 5. So some multiples of 16 will come closer to 565 and then some will go further, but the distance is not quite less than 113 by that particular multiple. So what we are asking for is not an easy thing. Getting this approximation is not easy, but we do seem to get it whenever we take P equal to 1. It seems to be better to stick to P equal to 1 and then try to approximate the error in the same way. What do I mean by the same way? So we have here approximated the number by its integral part, and then we have the fractional part. We inverted the fractional part. Remember, the fractional part was less than 1. So its inverse, its reciprocal is bigger than 1. Its integral part seems to give us the approximation for numerator 1. If there is an error still, you invert that error, you take the reciprocal of that and continue doing that. That seems to be the natural way. So we come to this construction. So what we do is that we start with our theta, take its integral part, call it A0. You may be lucky that your A0 may equal theta. If it doesn't happen, then there is a fractional part. You write the fractional part as 1 by theta 1. And here this theta 1 has to be bigger than 1 because the fractional part is something which is less than 1 and now it is also not 0, therefore this is strictly between 0 and 1. Note that if your theta is negative, a0 will be negative. But once you have taken care of a0, the remaining part is always going to be positive. Okay, so the next approximation to our theta is a0 plus 1 upon a1, where a1 is the integral part of theta 1. Let us see why this is true. We are approximating 1 by theta 1 by a natural by 1 upon q with the property that this be less than 1 by q square. This is our demand. So if you solve this, it will give you q minus theta 1, modulus of q minus theta 1, and denominator is q theta 1. I told you that theta 1 is now positive, and we will also take our denominators to be always positive. So q theta 1 is a positive quantity. We don't need to put the mod here. If you want to have this to be less than 1 upon q square, you can happily cancel a q from both the denominators. So you get mod of q minus theta 1 upon theta 1 to be less than q. Now if you take the q to be the integral part of your theta 1, the numerator is less than 1. That is okay. Further, the integral part is always less than or equal to your number. So q is less than or equal to theta 1. Therefore, when you take the reciprocal, we are going to get 1 upon q1 less equal 1 upon q. So the numerator is less than this, and 1 upon theta 1 is less equal 1 by q. So we get that this inequality is satisfied. So we have obtained our next approximation after starting with the integral part. We obtained the next approximation to be a0 plus 1 by a1, where a1 is the integral part of theta 1. Now if this a1 is not equal to theta 1, there is still some small error here. Then we repeat the procedure. So we write theta as a0 plus 1 upon theta 1, and theta 1 is a0 plus 1 up a1 plus 1 upon theta 2. So we have written theta as a0 plus 1 by a1 plus 1 by theta 2, and once again theta 2 is bigger than 1 because our a1 is not equal to theta 1. Then we repeat the procedure. We compute the integral part of theta 2, compute the integral part of theta 2, write it as a2. If you happen to have it equal to theta 2, good. Otherwise, you will have a further theta 3, which is still bigger than 1, and we can continue this way. So in general, we are going to get an expression of this type, where this theta n will be the remaining part after the n integers we have obtained. A0 is just an integer, A1 is A1, A2, A3, these are all going to be positive integers. So I started at around 11:15, right? When did I start? Yeah, so I have about half an hour still, but should I see if there
11:15,
are
sir.
any doubts with this construction so far, or should I go ahead? I don't see, yeah, I don't see many people asking doubts, so perhaps I can continue with the
There are no
presentation.
doubts.
So what we have done is that we have written our theta in terms of some integers, and then there is this 1 by theta n, which is an error. If this theta n after some nth stage happens to be an integer, then we would have written the whole expression using only integers, and we would have had a somewhat complicated way to write our theta in a nested way. But if you don't get theta n to be integer at any stage, that means you will have to keep doing this, and so ultimately we get an expression of this type. If you do not stop at the nth stage, then you will have this a0 to be some integer plus 1 by this whole quantity. So this whole quantity is kept in the denominator, and the denominator, which remember the denominator is our theta 1. So this is our theta 1, right? A1 plus 1 by theta 2 is our theta 1. So we are writing theta 1 again as A1 plus 1 upon theta 2. And theta 2 is A2 plus 1 upon theta 3. Theta 3 is A3 plus 1 upon theta 4, and we are continuing. So if you just continue this without stopping at nth stage, then you get this very curious expression. When we stopped at nth stage, we had this theta n, and so we could without any problem say that the expression gave us the value for theta. But if you do not stop at nth stage, you are going to get some expression, and in fact you are going to get an infinite such expression. We need to make sense of this infinite expression, so we need to show that this expression converges. This is something whenever we deal, mathematicians have a way to deal with infinite expressions. We talk about the infinite sums by converting it into a series, and we take the partial sums, which is if you have some infinitely many terms, you are trying to sum them. What you do is that you sum first n terms, that is some real number, because you are summing n real numbers, you get a real number. Do it for n plus 1, do it for n plus 2, n plus 3, and so on. So you get these real numbers, and you actually get a sequence of real numbers. And when you let n go to infinity, it is natural to think of the limit of this sequence as the sum of the series that you were looking at. So even here we would like to cut this at some finite stage and then take the limit. That is what we are going to do. But let me tell you that this is the continued fraction that we have. So a continued fraction is an expression of this type, where a0 is any integer. It can be a negative integer, it can be 0, or it can be positive integer. a1, a2, a3, a4, these are always positive integers. So these are natural numbers, and then we look at expression of this type. Now if you go in the market, you will see several such continued fractions which don't follow this property. So instead of 1 on in the numerator, you will have say b1, b2, b3, b4, and so on. So there are these pirated versions as I call, of our continued fraction, but we are not going to worry about them. In fact, to allow the b1, b2, b3, b4, people call this type of expression to be a simple continued fraction, where you have a0 to be integer, ai to be natural numbers, and the numerators are all 1. These are called simple continued fractions, but we are not going to talk about those other variants of continued fractions, so we are not going to, add an extra word to our notion. We will simply talk about continued fraction to mean that we are looking at an expression of this sort. It can be a finite expression, it may stop at a finite stage, or it may just go on. Both are possible. And we need to show that this thing converges nevertheless. Whenever we have a finite expression, of course, you can cross multiply and come back to the original thing. That will give you some number. But even when you have infinitely many terms here, we need to show that this does converge. So let's see how we see this. As an example, let me tell you that we have pi as a continued fraction, where 3 is the integral part. If you stop at the next level, which is 3 plus 1 by 7, you get 22 by 7. If you stop at the next stage, you get 3, 7, and 15, which gives you something that I have already calculated, is 333 upon 106. And if you stop after the next stage, which is 3, 7, 15, 1, then you get the number 355 by 113 that we were looking at. So this 355 by 113 is obtained by cutting the continued fraction for pi after 4 stages. So this is a0, this is a1, this is a2, this is a3. That's the 4th stage, because we are starting with a0 being the first stage. So that 355 upon 113 actually gives a very good approximation to pi. In fact, I have seen this somewhere that if you compute the perimeter of Earth using this value for pi, then the error is within 1 meter. So within this much, I think if this is 1 meter, this is the error that we get. So the number 355 upon 113 gives you very good approximation to pi. And um, one of our earlier Indian mathematician, perhaps the most famous Indian mathematician, Ramanujan, had obtained this approximation to pi during one of his papers which he wrote before going to Cambridge. So this is a paper I think written in 1913 or 1914, where he found a very good approximation to pi using this rational number 355 upon 113. I would also like to bring your attention to the possibility of having these digits to be more than 1. Here you have 15, here you have 292. So the integers that you get in the continued fraction can be more than 9. That is a significant thing, and I hope to come to this observation later. Let's now continue with our continued fraction. So starting with a real theta, we obtained an expression of this sort. There are these two observations that you make. First of all, every finite continued fraction is a rational number, because if I cut it at nth stage, if I just suppose I have it only up to a4, then a3 plus 1 by a4 will give me a4 a3 plus 1 upon a4. Then that will give me a4 upon a3 a4 plus 1, which is this quantity. Then I add a2 to that, and it's essentially a rational plus an integer is a rational. So if you stop at any level an, then an 1 upon an is a rational. You add an minus 1, you get a rational. Take its reciprocal, you will still get a rational, and add integers, and a finite such sequence will lead you to the theta. So, if you were only working up to a4, you will have 1 upon a4, which is rational. Adding a3 to that will give you a rational. 1 upon this 1 upon a4 plus a3 is a rational, because it's inverse of a rational. Then you add a2, you get another rational. 1 upon this whole thing, which is actually theta 2. Since theta 2 is rational, 1 upon theta 2 is rational, and a1 plus 1 upon theta 2, which is this, is going to be a rational. Its inverse is rational, and ultimately you will simply add a0. So this proof, which is neatly written with the help of mathematical induction, will tell you that any finite continued fraction is in fact a rational number. But converse is also true. Every rational number is a finite continued fraction. If you write it as a by b and you take away the integral part, you write a by b where a is less than b, you will write it as 1 upon b by a, and then take the integral part away. This is nothing but the Euclidean algorithm. You are going to see how many times you are going to apply the Euclidean algorithm to a and b. If b is bigger than a, there is a multiple of a which is less than b. So you will write b as qa plus r, where r is that remainder, and your b by a will be some integer plus r by a. And then you continue doing this, noting that the remainder keeps getting smaller and smaller at each time, and therefore it must eventually become 1. And so every rational number is also a finite continued fraction. So with these two things, what we observe is that if I cut my continued fraction at nth stage, we are going to get a rational number, and we call that Pn by Qn. So I cut it, say, at the 4th stage, which is going to be a0, a1, a2, a3. Then I get a rational. I will call that rational as P3 by Q3. My first rational is P1 by Q1, where P1 is A0 and Q1 is 1. My second rational is A0 plus 1 upon A1. So my numerator is A0, A1 plus 1 and denominator is A1. So always my denominators are positive integers and numerator can be any integer. And this is something you should note, that you are looking at A0, A1 plus 1. The way we have written this continued fraction, the convergents that we get, these are called convergents. Pn by Qn will be called convergents. This will have the property that Pn and Qn are always co-prime to each other. There will be no integer common between them. That is because A0 upon 1, you are starting with such a property, and then it is easy to see that it is followed every time. So our continued fraction is basically the limit of the convergence as n goes to infinity. So we will use this basic observation to prove that our theta is actually the corresponding continued fraction. Before that, I have these 4 statements. Let me explain these statements to you. The convergence will have numerator and denominator. And I told you that this numerator and denominator are always in the smallest form. So Pn and Qn are therefore now determined uniquely. Then this Pn and Qn satisfy these two recursion formulae. That means when you know what is your n minus 1th convergent and n minus 2th convergent, and you also know the partial quotient an, then you can compute Pn and Qn by using this formula. This formula follows by induction. So I will not be able to prove this formula, but this is not very difficult. It follows by induction. This formula also follows by induction, but it tells you something very interesting. It tells you that Pn upon Qn and Pn plus 1 upon Qn plus 1. If you write this as a 2 by 2 matrix, Pn, Qn, Pn plus 1, Qn plus 1, as a 2 by 2 matrix containing integer values, then it tells you that the matrix has determinant plus or minus 1. That is the nice thing about this. Another thing is, this is a very interesting observation. It tells you that your even convergent is less than or equal to theta, and the odd convergent is bigger than or equal to theta. How do we understand this? So note first that our first convergent, which was A0. So I think I have messed up here with the notations. I should have said this for odd and this for even. Okay. So the first convergent, or let's say that we start from 0th convergent, then this statement makes sense. So the first convergent is the integral part of theta, which is less than or equal to theta. And if you have observed, our next convergent was obtained by taking the integral part of theta 1. So a1 is less equal theta 1, but when you put it in the denominator, 1 upon theta 1 is going to be less equal 1 upon a1. Therefore, this a0 plus 1 upon a1 has gone beyond theta. You know, a1 is less than or equal to the reciprocal of the error. Therefore, 1 upon a1 is bigger equal 1 upon theta 1. 1 upon theta 1 gives you theta. And a0 plus 1 upon a1 gives you p1 upon a1. So p1 upon a1 has gone beyond theta. You should think of this as some kind of a, you have a point and we are trying to approximate this point. So you are starting from 0, you halt at the first approximation, or let's say the 0th approximation, which is the integral part of theta. Then you start going towards theta, and as you reach theta, you are not able to apply the brakes. And so you go slightly beyond theta. Then you realize that, oh, you have gone beyond. So you say, okay, let me call this P1 by Q1, and now you must turn back and start approaching theta again. But you know, this machine is such that the machine of continued fractions is such that it cannot stop at theta unless theta happens to be a rational number. It cannot stop at theta, and so it comes slightly earlier, slightly on the lower side of theta. That is P2 by Q2. And then you again start going towards theta, and then you get P3 by Q3. So if you take the consecutive convergence, then theta is always between them. The P0 upon Q0 is less equal theta, P1 upon Q1 is bigger equal theta, P2 by Q2 is less equal theta, but nearer than P0 by Q0. Then you have P3 by Q3, which is further than theta, but nearer than P1 by Q1, and so on. So this property says that theta is always going to lie between Pn by Qn and Pn plus 1 by Qn plus 1. And finally, we see from the recursion formulae that Qn always go to infinity as n goes to infinity. If you have infinite continued fraction, then the Qn must go to infinity. That is because your Ai are at least 1 and Qi are also at least 1. So you are taking your previous Qi and adding at least 1 to that. So every time your Qn is bigger than Qn minus 1, and you are doing it infinitely many times, so Qn should go to infinity. So essentially, these are the three properties which can be proved by induction, and the fourth one follows from first one, but we will assume these four very interesting properties to prove that our theta has this expression. So we observe this, that theta is going to lie between any two successive convergents. So therefore, theta minus Pn by Qn is less than the difference between the two successive convergents. If I do the cross multiplication, we get Pn Qn plus 1 minus Qn Pn plus 1. Pn Qn plus 1 minus Pn plus 1 Qn. We know it's a power of minus 1. When you put mod, you are just going to get 1. And the denominator gives you Qn plus 1. And since Qn plus 1 is strictly bigger than Qn, this is less than, actually strictly less than 1 upon Qn square. So theta minus Pn by Qn is less than 1 upon Qn square. Since Qn go to infinity, we have that Pn by Qn converges to theta. So we have proved that our convergence Pn by Qn actually converge to the number theta that we had thought about. So this expression now does converge, and it converges to the theta we started with. But while doing it, we have obtained that theta minus Pn by Qn is in fact less than 1 upon Qn square. So theta minus P by Q is less than 1 upon Q square. Therefore, these convergents all give good approximation to theta. This is something that we were looking for when we began with. And this is something that has led us to thinking about continued fractions. So the convergents are the rational numbers which give a good approximation to the given real number. In fact, we will see that they give better approximation. In what sense do I mean this? So perhaps I should not spend time in proving this. These statements are going to give you the proof. Okay, let me just read it quickly. Theta is between these consecutive convergents, so theta minus Pn by Qn and theta minus the next convergent will have opposite signs, because if the one of them is before theta and another is after theta, so the signs are opposite, and therefore if you take the modulus of those numbers, you are simply going to get the difference between those two numbers, which is 1 upon Qn plus 1. And this is one very interesting inequality which says alpha beta is less than 1 by 2 alpha square plus beta square, or 2 alpha beta is less than alpha square plus beta square. This is something that follows by looking at alpha minus beta whole square and then observing that alpha is not equal to beta, then you always get a positive quantity. So one of the Pn by Qn and Pn plus 1 by Qn plus 1 will satisfy this inequality. Because if none of these satisfy this inequality, then this is bigger than 1 upon 2 Qn square, and this next one is bigger than 1 upon 2 Qn plus 1 square. This is bigger than this quantity, this one, and this is the second one is bigger than this one. Therefore, the sum has to be bigger than this sum. But we prove that since the sum is 1 upon Qn plus 1, it is actually less than this sum. You should think of this as capital A, capital B, capital C, capital D. We have A plus B is less than C plus D. So A has to be less equal C and B has to be less equal, or B has to be less equal D. A bigger than C and B bigger than D cannot happen. So what we have seen, let's think about this again. We saw that the convergent satisfy theta minus p by q less than 1 upon q square, but one of the two consecutive should satisfy theta minus p by q less than 1 upon 2 q square. So earlier, for a good approximation, we were happy to have the distance from theta to be less than the denominator square reciprocal. But now we are saying that it's even better. It is less than or equal to 1 upon 2 q square. So this is what I mean by when I say that the convergents give you better approximations. And in fact, if you go to my title of the talk, they give the best approximation. And how do we see that? So this slide is an intermediate statement which says that if you have any integer p and you take q from between 0 and qn plus 1, then mod q theta minus p has to be bigger than or equal to qn theta minus pn. This is an interesting thing which is proved here. I will perhaps try to make these slides available to you all so that you know where to see these proofs. But let's assume this statement and go to proving that our convergents are the best. East or west, convergents are the best. So how do we see that? Before we go to seeing that, let me reiterate that our convergents are better. That means theta minus p by q is less than or equal to 1 upon 2 q square. This is satisfied by at least one between any two consecutive convergents. So let's say that we have a rational p by q which approximates our real theta in a way better than our convergents do. So we have seen that there are good approximations and convergents are among good approximations. And in fact, one from each pair of consecutive convergents give you better approximation. And then there is this rational number which is trying to do even better than our convergents. Then p by q has to be a convergent. That's a very striking result because it says that you look at this p by q which is trying to be better than a convergent, better than all convergents, then it has no other way but to be a convergent. And the proof is written here. We will take our n with the property that qn is less equal q less than the next q n plus 1. And then we obtain the inequality which says that p by q minus pn by qn is strictly less than 1 upon q qn. But if these two numbers are not same, then you should get the numerator to be pqn minus qpn, which is at least 1 because you are putting a mod, and the denominator is qqn. So this quantity in the mod is bigger equal 1 by qqn. But you also get it to be less than qqn, which is a contradiction. And therefore, pn upon qn has to be equal to p by q. It's a contradiction to this assumption. And so Pn by Qn has to be P by Q. So this proves that convergents are the best approximations. And guess this explains most of the terms that I have said in my title. Continued fractions providing best rational approximations since antiquity. So antiquity is perhaps the only statement which I have not explained. So, in some sense, sorry, I don't want to thank you yet. So in some sense, what we have seen is that the continued fractions are going to give you the approximations for rational numbers. The continued fractions correspond to Euclidean algorithm, and Euclidean algorithm was given by Euclid, which is about 300 BC. So we can say that continued fractions have been there since before antiquity, before 300 years before Christ came. But even if we don't agree on whether simply having Euclidean algorithm meant that we had continued fractions, there is an evidence that Aryabhatta in 499 used continued fractions. So 499 is roughly 1500 years before us, and continued fractions have been there since such a long time. So I guess that explains the title since antiquity also. And with this, I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity. I would just like to mention one more thing, that there is an NPTEL course on basic number theory. And if you follow this NPTEL course, you should just search for NPTEL, NPTEL, basic number theory. Then you will be able to see proofs of most of the statements that I have stated here. Thank you very much. And I would like to stop at this point. Thank you.
Sir,